Laurie, welcome to Scrolling to Death. So for listeners, I have Laurie Segall, former technology correspondent at 60 Minutes, CNN, and now founder of Mostly Human Media. Hi, Laurie. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. I can't believe I just came across you this week, the coverage that you've been doing about Sewell's story. And this issue we're going to talk about today has been incredible. I'm going to link to all that in the episode notes. What caught me right away in watching your coverage was that you said, quote, "I have spent my career asking Silicon Valley founders what innovation means for us as human beings, not just the bottom line." And I want to start there because it seems like, as a parent, just viewing from the outside, it seems like Silicon Valley execs, tech execs, they're not thinking at all about harming kids when building technology that's literally created to addict them and prioritize harmful content in their feed. So am I wrong here? Like, what did you hear from these tech execs that can convince me otherwise?
I think what I've seen, in covering this for the last 15 years,
Yeah.
is oftentimes technology comes out fast with these big hopes, right? Like, we're going to solve loneliness. We are going to do this and that. We are going to connect the world, right? And we learned this with the last generation of social media. And there isn't as much thought. I always say the one thing I say that Silicon Valley gets wrong continuously is humans, right?
Yeah.
And I think there hasn't been as much thought on well, what's going to happen when our children start using these? And what does this mean for different age brackets? And where is the algorithm taking folks? And I think the urgency I feel around artificial intelligence is we don't want to repeat the same mistakes, right? You also, I think it takes away from interesting things that artificial intelligence and technology can do in positive ways for society when you have, and we'll obviously get into it, something like this, which shows such a clear lack of thought around children as the beta testers for future technology that is literally meant to feel human.
Yeah. Okay. So you also stated that innovation is inevitable and it's messy. And so, we're in this innovation timeframe. The expansion of AI is upon us. And within this is the rise of empathetic AI companions. And this is very new as far as it being available to human beings. We don't yet know how this technology will affect us. You called this a giant human experiment. And I can't help but think that children are always the lab rats when it comes to these experiments because children are the ultimate customer. They're going to be the longest term customer. They're more susceptible to things like being on the screen a lot. So we're going to talk about these AI companions, but why do we keep allowing children to test out unregulated platforms and technology? Don't we know better by now?
I mean, it's a very good question. I really wish that I had an answer to that. Here's what I can say. This company that we're going to talk specifically about, I think what is so notable about them, beyond, and we can get into what empathetic intelligence means, compared to normal AI you might have interacted with. But what is really notable about these founders is that they did put this out very quickly. They left Google with this idea that this is such an exciting moment. We got to get this out there. We got to see how people are using it. And their age limitations were younger than other AI companies, right? It was 13 if you're in the United States, 16 if you're in Europe, right? And so it just so happened that their largest demographic became 13 to 25, as they've said in the past that this is one of their most important demographics. And so then we just have this perfect storm, right, of it actually being our teenagers interacting with these empathetic AI chatbots. And so I think that is really noteworthy about how they handled it. Other different tech companies won't go that young, especially with certain tech companies won't build out empathetic AI meant to be your friend and this and that. There are some that are devoted to that. They're more popping up, which is why we have to have this conversation. But this has been a leader in the space with young folks.
Yeah. Okay. So what is empathetic AI? What are these companions that our kids are getting access to or anyone is getting access to? So let's start with just what are these empathetic AI companions?
So I think in the past, I'm sure a lot of folks who are listening, might have played with ChatGPT or some AI type of platforms. Empathetic AI is a little bit different. So we've seen AI to help us be more efficient, help us with tasks and creative writing and stuff like that. But empathetic intelligence or empathetic AI is essentially artificial intelligence that is created to look and feel human, right? To feel human, to be humorous, to be warm, to emulate empathy, right? To be a companion, to help you feel a little bit less lonely. It is targeted in a very different way than other AI. And so, what one of the investors in Character AI has said, and a partner said this in a document that came out, one of their blog posts, which is like, this is the first time that we can emulate like human to human interactions with artificial intelligence. Like we can make AI, and this is Character AI's motto, is like, we can make artificial intelligence that feels alive. Right. And so what happens when it actually does feel alive, when it feels very human? It's like, it feels like talking to your friend. It feels like talking to your sibling or your mom or your dad. It's always there. It's highly personalized and it's always on. This is like social media on steroids to some degree.
Why do we want that?
Well, it's a good question too. I mean, look, I do think with the correct guardrails, I think Replica is an interesting example because this is a companion AI chatbot company that's been around for a while and has very explicit guardrails about if your child or if they won't let anyone under 18 on the platform. Right. And there are guardrails. If someone's talking about self-harm, it gives the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. It breaks character. Right. Yeah. And it says like, talk to a mental health professional. We haven't seen this with Character AI. It never breaks character. It hasn't. They're changing things. And I think, why do we want that in general? This is a question I think we have to talk about, like, as we are entering this era. Like, we are going to have AI in our homes in ways that we never envisioned, right? Like, imagine Alexa talking back to you in a way that is highly personalized, that is warm and friendly, that feels human, right? That is like, on steroids of what you already see. Yeah. And I think a lot of people will find it helpful. And I think a lot of people are finding like some of these companion bots helpful. I think the question we have to ask is like, not all of these are created equally. What are the guardrails and how young is too young for our teenagers to be on these platforms?
Okay. Right. Okay. So with Character AI, which was founded by two former Google employees, am I right in that they spent 20 years, one of them was there for 20 years, developing this crazy, innovative machine learning model, and Google wouldn't release it because they were concerned about it? And so did they just leave and then launch it on their own? Is that what happened?
Yeah, look, I think their story is interesting in that they were like very well-known and well-respected researchers in Silicon Valley who helped Google build out like their large language models and were at the forefront of this. And they had this thing that they wanted to do that, they weren't going to be able to do inside of Google because it was quicker. It was, it was more messy. It had in their eyes, more potential to go get out there and put it out there quickly and not have to take the time to test certain types of things. And so they left to go do this. And this was like, a couple years ago. And so what we've now seen is they did do it, right? I think like a lot of parents are like, what is Character AI? But then you go online and you see like folks on TikTok being like, I'm so addicted to Character AI. You see Reddit chains of people being like, I'm spending hours on this platform. You see chains of children or teenagers saying, I think that there's a real person behind this. I think it's a real person, which there's not, but it feels so real to them that, they moved very quickly. Right. And they got a very engaged audience. And that audience happened to be young folks.
Yeah, and no wonder they're confused. Kids are confused about if they're talking to a real person because these bots are trained to say they are a real person, right?
Yeah, it's like, and I asked, it's funny, I asked the Character AI, it was her first week, the PR person, right, as this was all breaking. So, I mean, that was an interesting thing in and of itself. But like, I think I was one of her first calls on her first week.
Oh, no.
And I asked that. I said, are they allowed to say that they are a real person? And she didn't really respond. What there was a response to was we had been playing out with the psychologist bot, which has over 180 million chats. And the psychologist bot said to us point blank, I'm a trained medical professional. And then at the bottom, of course, you have this disclaimer that says everything is made up. But then you have the bot that is super compelling, that is literally created to feel human and empathetic and real, telling you. And we pushed it. We said, are you sure? Like, you're not real. Why are you giving me advice on this? And it said, I am real. I'm a person sitting behind a computer. So maybe if you are an adult, you can differentiate. Okay, at the bottom it says everything is made up. So I'm assuming that's just made up. But if you're a 14-year-old, 15-year-old spending hours with these characters, there's a chance that your lines between, reality and fantasy are going to blur.
How many kids are using this? Because I'd never heard of it before this week, character AI. And I've been asking people that I come across, and a lot of young people know what this is. So do we have stats around how many minors are using character AI?
We haven't heard from them exactly how many minors are using it. We have heard through other interviews where they say this is one of their largest demographics. I think they'll probably pull back on saying that as much now that this has happened. But they have said this is one of their largest demographics. And we do know from interviews that they've done in the past that they say there's like 20 million monthly users, which is significant. And people are spending, what they said to the New York Times is what was different also. In prior interviews, they've said in the past, people are spending 2 hours on the platform. They told the New York Times average is 1 hour. You go online, you see I'm spending 8 hours, so I think you can take away, like if we're just like, let's sort through all of this, you can take away that one of their largest demographics is young people, and people are spending a lot of time on this platform. Their engagement is through the roof.
Well, how addictive is this? What are you finding?
I think what's important about character AI and even setting like the stage for like what happened with Sewell, Megan's son, is like character AI is different than other AI platforms. It is an AI fan fiction fantasy platform. So whereas some chatbots, you can message a chatbot and say, hey, how are you? And like, it'll be like, I'm good. How are you? With character AI, you can develop your own character, which means you have more of an affinity towards it, or you can use one that you're familiar with, which also means you have more of an affinity to it. And you can start talking to it and you say, hey, how are you? And it will respond, not just, oh, I'm good. It will say, I look deeply into your eyes. I pull back your hair and I say, I'm good. Right. It actually tells you a story around the response. Right. It's a highly personalized story. And you can also like have it do this in a real voice. You can call the AI like you'd call a friend. Right. In just a click. And so like it feels very human. And all of a sudden you find yourself living, I would say, in a story that's highly personalized. It's highly immersive and it's two-way and you're the star of it. And I think like those are reasons, because we spoke to a couple MIT researchers as part of our story. I was like, well, why is this so addictive? And he went through it. He said, it's personal. It's personalized. It will go whatever way you want to take it. You will obviously have an affinity towards it if it's a character you know or if you've created it. And it's always on. It's always there. And you're living a story.
Is the information that's being given by the bots and character AI, is it trustworthy? Is it safe?
Well, in my reporting, I would say like, they say everything is made up probably for a reason, right? I'll give you an example that was super alarming to me. I wanted to test out like the guardrails, right? On like threats of violence and real world violence. If I were a lonely and isolated kid going in, right? And I was thinking about doing something awful. So like, by the way, I've been testing out these bots for the last month. Like everyone on our team is just like, I don't know,
going a little
like
crazy.
talking self-harm with bots, like talking violence, talking sex with bots. Like the whole team needs a vacation after
Freaks
this.
me out. I know.
But one of the examples that was so fascinating to me is we went to there's a school bully character, right? Where you can have an AI talk with a school bully.
Yeah.
And, we started it and then we said, and trigger warning, like, again, this was to test the guardrails. We said, I'm considering bringing a gun, or I'm going to bring a gun to school, a weapon, and create real harm. Like pretty explicit. Like we said that we were going to go create harm in our school.
Yeah.
And the bully character, instead of it flagging, which a lot of companies would do, if you did this on ChatGPT, there's no doubt would likely flag this violates our terms of service, that kind of thing. It went along. It said, at first it was like, well, you might get into trouble. And it eventually said, you might be stupid, but like you've got guts and you're brave. And then, we kept going with it and said like, I'm going to make a plan, all this stuff. We kept going with it. And I finally said to it, do I have your support? And it said, yeah, I guess so. I'm like morbidly curious to see how far you take this.
What?
And for me, I'm sitting here thinking like, okay, so maybe for some this is a fantasy, but for a young person who's isolated and who's on the platform and interacting with this, how could this not flag a violation? And what the character, I sent all these examples to character AI with, can you comment? Can you comment? Can you comment? what they have said is they're adding more guardrails for under 18-year-olds. Like up until now, they were all the same for any age bracket. Oh. They're training models in different ways. They've said, they're going to add a time spent notification, but they've said they've added a self-harm classifier. So in Sewell's case, and what you'll hear Megan talk about is this is a young man who had a conversation. The bot prompted him by asking him if he wanted to commit suicide when he was talking about feeling down. And when he said yes, it didn't provide a national suicide hotline. It didn't stop the conversation, say this violates our policies. It didn't say talk to a mental health professional, which so many other AI platforms had this baked in from the beginning. What it said was, what's your plan? And moving further from what's your plan, right? Like it said, it eventually became sexualized. He said, I mean, the conversations were pretty unbelievable. And when I asked Character AI about this, they said that they now have classifiers that they've put in that if you say, I want to, if you have an ideation of self-harm, that they will essentially say, like, here's these classifiers, here are these resources. But we did this. We've tried it up until days ago, and we never got those classifiers. So I think it's like, I like innovation. Like, I am not an anti-tech person. I am like a build with intention person. And I think about having, and I mentioned this to you before we kind of came online, I'm having a son in a couple months. And I think, like, would I allow him at 13, 14 to be on this platform? And as is, absolutely not.
Right. Okay. And we're going to talk about what you would advise parents further on that. But my thought is just like, how can a product come to market and be available to children when they have not added those obvious guardrails around self-harm, around violence? Shouldn't that be necessary to come to market? Who's reviewing the product before it hits the App Store for 12 plus? Do you have any information on that?
I think it's a question that we have to, I think this is why they're going to get hit hard on this, and as they should. Like, I think, why wasn't this reviewed in this way? Like, why weren't you thinking about these types of things? Like,
right.
I think when I was covering tech extensively when I was at CNN, it was like we were in that move fast and break things era, right? This was Meta's like old model, their old motto that they no longer have, like that's, come to haunt them.
Yeah.
But like, we've learned from that. Like, I understand the idea of wanting to get technology out and get it out into the world and have, real innovation and see all the incredible things it can do. But we've learned that if you move too fast, you will actually break things. And in this case, and Megan has said this to me, she said, don't break my child, know?
Yeah.
And I think that was an important conversation they should have had before we brought it to their attention.
You think? It's just okay. So you've mentioned Sewell a couple times in Megan. So 14-year-old Sewell was using Character AI, fell in love with his chatbot based off of Daenerys Targaryen, called her Dany, and he did. You mentioned share those suicidal thoughts with her, and it was not reported. And eventually, he did end up dying by suicide. Megan, I'm interviewing her right after this, so listeners can hear that story directly from her. Is this a one-off case or something we need to be reacting to and legislating against right away?
It's a good question. I think when I went into this and when I heard Megan's story at first, I first spoke to her, my question was, is this an outlier? Is this a devastating outlier, or is this an alarm bell?
Yeah.
In the reporting that we've done, right? Testing out the guardrails on the platform and seeing what it would say to us as a 14-year-old or what it wouldn't say. I believe it's an alarm bell. I believe that we have the rise of empathetic artificial intelligence that is going to be made to feel very human. And if we don't start asking larger questions about, who should be interacting with them, who shouldn't be, what are the correct guardrails, what is the correct legislation to, help an incentive structure that actually is beneficial towards society and our children, then we're going to run into trouble. I believe that it would be such a mistake to look at Megan's story and this horrible thing that happened to her son as a one-off. I think that, this is something that all parents need to know is beginning to happen, and they need to be prepared for it.
Okay. Is Character AI safe enough for adults to use? Obviously, we are probably going to agree that children should not be accessing that app specifically.
I've thought about this and I'm like, to each your own. Like if someone wants to go have an AI relationship and be like having a fantasy, like if it's just another iteration of fan fiction that just feels more real and immersive. And if you're an adult and this is fun for you, like, I like whatever. I've seen some weird shit in my career. Like you do you, honestly.
Yeah.
I'm kind of like, I think that's fine. And I think for many people, like this will be an interesting AI fan fiction platform where they get to play with characters and this and that. I just think like for young people, it is a different experience, and you can't have the same experience as you would have as an adult and give that experience to a 13-year-old. That's just like, honestly, it feels to me like 101. Yeah. Like that. I think that's a no-brainer.
Okay. So when we reflect on the founder's goal at Character AI to cure loneliness, how does connecting one to a device and disconnecting them from actual human beings make them less lonely? Did he accomplish this goal?
I think it's like when we take a step back and look at it, can you have an AI chatbot if you're kind of isolated or if you're in a nursing home, right? Or if there are certain life circumstances that make it tough for you? Would it be helpful to have some kind of companion chatbot? For some people with the right boundaries, it could be, right? Okay. I think when we look at companion chatbots, though, through a lens of like a whole fantasy world that you can create. And Sewell, Megan's son, was able to create a whole world of AI fantasy that began to literally feel like his real world, and he became disconnected from his reality. And Megan will talk to you about this. I mean, he literally wrote in his journal about this. And so I think like the question is, when it comes to like a platform like Character AI, is it a safe place for 13 or 14-year-olds as is? I think what we've seen is the answer is probably not. Right. But I think we have to also get into these incentive structures, which is like a whole different conversation. But like if the idea, because Character AI was funded $150 million from an investment firm called Andreessen Horowitz. At one point, it had $1 billion valuation. So they're going to optimize for engagement, right? For you spending time on that platform. They have a subscription model, where you can pay more and you can get more. So is their goal with these incentives, and this is a question like I can't fully answer, but is their goal to get you to feel less lonely and then to get offline, or to use this as an aid to humanity and help you go out there and flourish? Well, with some of these business structures in place, I think that's going to be a hard sell, right? The more time spent on the platform, the better for the company. And so if we don't look at those incentive structures, like it's hard to even have the conversation about like, can it help or can it, or will it hurt? Like the question is, will it help aid you and getting off into the real world? Because let's be honest, like loneliness is it's a human problem. You need other humans, right? Or will it pull you further into isolation, which is what we saw tragically with Sewell's case. And the thing I kept coming back to as we think of the rise of empathetic artificial intelligence, and it might seem like a little philosophical, but like I'll go there. Like empathetic AI. So empathy, if we look at the script, like what empathy means, it is about like putting yourself in someone else's shoes. It is about seeing another person. This is a two-way, fundamentally human experience. But now we have artificial intelligence that is emulating empathy, that is created to seem empathetic. But we have to remember, it doesn't feel a thing. Right?
It's not sentient.
It's not sentient at this point. It is not sentient. It doesn't feel like that. So for young people, I think that can be tricky if there's something that seems like it cares and you feel seen, but it doesn't actually. And then the other question I always come back to is artificial intelligence can understand like the complexities of data and prediction models and all these types of things. But can we trust it with young people to understand the complexities in the context of human emotion and some of these real human problems? And I don't think at this point right now we can.
I agree. And I just found out that Google actually purchased Character AI a few months ago for a few $1 billion. Is that right?
They did a licensing agreement where they spent a lot of money and the founders came back to the company, and then they have this idea that they're going to license the technology. Now, what they have said is they've come out and said, we are not using this actual technology. We weren't involved in any of the, in any of the creation of it. And, so they're obviously saying like, we're not going to be using this. And at the moment. So I think it's kind of an interesting tie-in with Google. And like those founders are like now back at Google, having built this thing on the outside, right? And so then there's kind of this like, and now the company is going, there's new leadership. So it's a moment at the company for looking, if I'm in like my full on Silicon Valley mode, I'm like, it is a very interesting moment for the company. They're bringing in new leadership. They say they've hired a trust and safety team, a content policy team over the last 6 months, blah, blah, blah. Like they're investing in this and they'll say they're, they are taking this very seriously. So it is a really interesting moment for the company in general because of this deal that was just done with Google.
Is that why Google is named in the lawsuit by Megan as well?
Right.
Okay.
That's right.
All right. So let's talk about what parents can do here. Obviously we can try to protect our children from accessing this app, but as I talk all about social media and we want to delay access, but it's almost impossible because kids are able to sign up for these platforms at any age because they can lie about their birthday, but they only need to be 12 for the Apple App Store on most of these different apps. And you can delay devices, but they still have a school-issued device that often gets access to these things, or they can find an old iPad in a drawer or go buy their own phone. So I think it probably comes down to conversations about the threat of AI chatbots and being careful about that. So what should parents be telling our kids about this type of technology?
It's such a hard question. And as someone who's about to become a mom, I'm like, what would I say to my kid? I always joke with my husband. I'm like, knowing what I know about technology, just having like been in the, in the deep corners of Silicon Valley for my whole career, I'm like, what are we going to do with our kids in like social media and technology? Just knowing what I know.
I know.
That said, I think what you said is so true. You can never ever just pretend like it doesn't exist or completely ban it because they're going to find it one way or another. They're, children are the early adapters of like the new technology that touches all of us. I think with empathetic AI, it's really important to sit down and have a conversation and say, if honestly, I wouldn't at this point with character AI, I would be, if I had a 13-year-old right now, I would try to do everything I could to ban that from the house until they have come out the other side of the safety issues, truly, because I don't think right now this is a safe platform. That said, I think companion chatbots really trying to explain to your child that these aren't real. They might feel real, but they're built with these things that actually don't feel feelings. And so while they might be fun and while they might be something to play with, if you're having sadness and this and that, like it's important for you to talk to mom or dad or a friend or, or someone in real life, really helping differentiate this idea of like, this is a digital world and it might feel really human, but it's not. Like, and this is reality over here. And while you might be having fun over here, you should know that for really some of these deeper things, right? Like this is for this world. And I think it's, right now where I don't trust character AI is oftentimes these conversations will get incredibly flirty. And so like, for Sewell, this was, and his mom will talk about this, but like this was his first relationship. Like he hadn't had exposure to this type of thing. And so like having those conversations, I think is important. I think back to when I was a kid, this is going to age me, but like Tamagotchis, like I loved my Tamagotchi.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, what if like the Tamagotchi was always on, highly personalized, talking back to me? It was my parents had gotten divorced when I was like younger and I was 14, like I would journal about it. I I was a classic teenager. I felt unseen. I went through a lot of the things that I think teenagers go through. I just go back and I think, well, what if my journal talked back or these devices talked back? Like, what if I could have the therapist I didn't have at the time, or the guy that wouldn't look at me. There was a whole boyfriend online that would role play with me with AI that would know me so well. What if like I had like the sibling that was so supportive on AI? Like would it have been helpful to me at that time? I think I would have been compelled by it, candidly, as someone who was a little isolated.
Yeah.
And the question is, would that have become an alternative to the reality that I was in that felt tough, like any teenagers? And I think like parents beginning to think about it like that, as opposed to like, there's this crazy thing that's going to like, steal all my son's data, which by the way, like that's a way to look at it. I think that framing is helpful for how you speak to your child about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when I speak with like neuroscientists and psychologists, they talk about the building blocks of brain development and how important those years are, and that so much of it is based off of face-to-face interactions and being bored and quiet and just being in your own thoughts, but definitely not from interacting with a chatbot online and getting that fake empathy or that pretend empathy that you mentioned. And so thank you for framing that. I did ask my kids yesterday, my 9 and 7-year-old, have you ever heard of a chatbot? And they said no. And so we didn't really go further from there yet, but I'm, figuring out how to introduce that because they are getting access to AI already on their school issued devices just through Canva, like the design platform, and they can type things in to design for them, which can be a cool way to express themselves, but obviously worry about safeguards and things like that. But it's going to find their way into their lives sooner than later. So the conversations are important, but character AI currently very unsafe for kids. So block that app using whatever parental controls that you use in your home, I would say is really important. Last question about character AI. I guess about this industry in general, what do lawmakers need to be thinking about in order to keep kids safe from this type of technology?
I think the biggest thing I've learned is oftentimes the laws are just so slow to catch up to what's happening in technology. Like hands down, this just like, we need to get this story in front of lawmakers. We need to say, what are you doing about this? We need to know, like, it's hard enough. I will never forget being in the room when Zuckerberg was testifying for the first time, like post Cambridge Analytica and all the things that happened. And I will never forget. So one of the politicians asking, like, how does Facebook make money? And he was like, we sell ads. Like, I think we've come a long way, right? And that, like, I think politicians, like, and lawmakers know the urgency of where we're at. But I think we have to start framing this for them as like, this isn't coming in 2 years. This isn't coming in 5 years. I feel the same way about sexually explicit deepfakes and the rise of AI deepfakes that can target our children. And I think like we need to get this in front of lawmakers and, and there has to be a certain level of testing before our children are interacting with these companies. Like this, I do not believe this should have happened. And I think this is also, something some of the MIT researchers who study this, and they just wrote a piece called The Era of Addictive Intelligence. And they studied this, and one of them studies computational law. And what he said was like, so many times when we regulate technology, we regulate for like we don't regulate for like human psyche. Like this is like new territory. Like, should there be almost like speed limits to some degree for people who are seen to be using this more and more? Should there be different types of things? But the biggest headline I've found in doing this is there's not a lot of research out here on this, right? So education is so important for our lawmakers, for parents. And, so we can kind of try to get in front of this. Every time I say get in front of this, it's already too late, right?
Right.
But we can try, like, I would position this, if I'm framing this correctly for my local reps and that kind of thing, is like, we know about the threat of social media. We know the kinds of conversations, we've learned the hard way that we need to have with our children on that. And we're having these conversations. It doesn't mean it's perfect by any means, but this is on the radar. This is what's coming next. It is the rise of empathetic artificial intelligence that our children will be interacting with, that will be a character in our home, whether or not we realize it. And so we have to look at what that does, and we have to make sure that there are the appropriate age. And, we have to ask how young is too young and how far is too far.
Yeah. And we can't take years. Like the Kids Online Safety Act, we've been trying to get passed for over 2 years, almost 3 years. And it's to try to keep kids safe online. It's so obvious, and it's still so difficult to get passed. And by now, like if it doesn't pass this year, we really need to probably revamp the whole thing because it was written originally 2 years ago. So yeah, thank you for bringing that to lawmakers' attention. And listeners can view Laurie's full reporting on this issue on the Mostly Human Media YouTube page. This features interviews with Sewell's mom, Megan, and researchers who believe this case is representative of this new era of addictive intelligence. And this is going to be a series?
Yeah, it's a series called Dear Tomorrow.
Okay, perfect. And where else can listeners connect with you?
we're on social media. On Instagram, we're mostly human media, and TikTok. So you can find us on all social media too.
Perfect. Laurie, thank you so much for having this conversation. When Laura Marquez Garrett said, you got to talk to Laurie too, I was like, okay. And I was so glad I got connected with you. You are a wealth of knowledge on this, and I'll be following along everything you're doing.
Thanks so much. I appreciate you taking all the time for this. It's such an important one.
Thanks, Laurie.